Trades in the NHL are make or break scenarios. On one hand, a team can greatly improve their roster for both the present and the future, but on the other side, one trade can be detrimental to a team's future success. On this video, we're going to count down the 15 worst NHL trades of all time, but as they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Before we start, this video is brought to you by Anderson Prints. Whether it's for your bedroom or college dorm, these high-quality canvas prints are perfect for any sports fan. With hundreds of unique combinations of sizes, sports, and even custom orders, these canvases are the best way to add some life to your walls. Purchase on Etsy with the link in my bio and use code REAPS for 10% off your order. Number 15. Marcel Dionne to Los Angeles. On June 23, 1975, the Detroit Red Wings traded their captain and former second overall pick, Marcel Dionne, to the LA Kings. Dionne was one of 5 pieces in this deal, as he was shipped off to California alongside depth defenseman Bart Crashley in exchange for Terry Harper, Dan Maloney, and a second-round pick in the 1976 draft. The trade stemmed from Dionne's frustrations with Detroit's constant losing, and his agent, the famed Alan Eagleson, continued to push Red Wings management for more and more money for his client. At the time of the trade, Dionne was coming off his best season yet, as he scored 121 points in 80 games for the Wings. Despite his impressive offensive skill, the 5'8" forward was traded to LA, where he inked a $300,000 per year deal, the richest in hockey history at the time. It's clear he was just getting started with his career, as he went on to have 7 more 100-point seasons for the Kings, and ultimately finished his career sitting 6th all-time in points. As for the Red Wings, things didn't turn out as well. Terry Harper was immediately named team captain, but failed to impress and played his way out of the league within 5 years. Dan Maloney would stay in Detroit for just 3 seasons before being shipped off to Toronto, never scoring more than 66 points, and Jim Roberts, who turned out to be that second-round draft pick, would never play a game for the Red Wings. Number 14. Jaromir Jagr to New York. On January 23, 2004, the Washington Capitals traded star forward Jaromir Jagr to the New York Rangers in exchange for Anson Carter. At the time, the Capitals were frustrated with their lack of success, paired with the expensive talent, so they were looking to unload Jagr's massive $11 million per year contract. There were very few takers, but the bright lights of Broadway seemed to be calling for a superstar like Jagr. At the time, Jagr had scored 201 points in 190 games for the Capitals, and it didn't seem like he was slowing down. Anson Carter, on the other hand, had just 17 points through the first 43 games of that 2003 season. So in many ways, Carter was the polar opposite of the skilled Jagr, but for some reason he seemed like a reasonable exchange for one of the greatest players of all time in a one-for-one deal. Jagr, of course, would go on to score 319 points in 277 games for the Rangers, including leading them to the playoffs in 3 seasons before heading to Russia, while Anson Carter would play just 19 games for the Capitals, scoring 5 points before being traded to the LA Kings. Number 13. Tuukka Rask to Boston. On June 24, 2006, the Toronto Maple Leafs traded the rights to goaltending prospect Tuukka Rask to the Boston Bruins in exchange for a more proven goaltender in Andrew Raycroft. At the time, the Maple Leafs deemed Canadian goaltending prospect Justin Pogge as their goaltender of the future, and thus viewed Rask as expendable, so just 1 year after selecting him 21st overall, they swapped him for Andrew Raycroft. Raycroft was coming off his second full season in the NHL, and thus far hadn't shown anything too promising. Through 87 games played, he had a .910 save percentage and a 2.59 goals against average, while Tuukka Rask at the time had just posted an outstanding season playing over in Finland's top league. As we all know, Tuukka would eventually go on to lead the Boston Bruins in net for over a decade, while winning a Stanley Cup and a Vezina Trophy. While on the other hand, we could say that Andrew Raycroft landed on the opposite end of the spectrum, as he would play just 2 seasons in Toronto with a combined save percentage of .890 and a goals against average of 3.17, average from 91 games. In June of 2008, the Leafs bought out the rest of his contract. Adding insult to injury, it became known that prior to completing the trade, the Bruins themselves were planning on placing Raycroft on waivers, meaning the Leafs simply could have claimed him for free. Number 12. Ryan McDonagh to New York. On June 30, 2009, the Montreal Canadiens traded defensive prospect Ryan McDonagh to the New York Rangers for Scott Gomez. Although these 2 players were the backbone of the deal, there were several more pieces involved, as Ryan McDonagh was accompanied by Pavel Valentenko, Doug Yannick, and Christopher Higgins, while Scott Gomez was paired with Tom Pyatt and Michael Busto. At the time of the trade, Ryan McDonagh was entering his junior season at the University of Wisconsin after being selected 12th overall in the 2007 draft. Scott Gomez, on the other hand, was coming off his worst statistical season since entering the league, and had 5 years remaining on his contract with a $7.3 million cap hit. The other 5 pieces of the trade would really have no impact on either team, so we're going to just mainly focus on Gomez and McDonagh to prove my point here, but it won't be very hard to do that. McDonagh, of course, would lead the Rangers' blue line for nearly a decade, while also being captain for 4 years. His tenure in New York, of course, ended when he was traded to Tampa last season, but he was able to garner a king's ransom for the Rangers. Meanwhile, Scott Gomez lasted just 3 years in Montreal, and he regressed more and more each year. After scoring just 9 goals combined in his final 2 years in Montreal, Scott Gomez was bought out of his contract in January of 2013, and would go on to medal through the league for the next couple of years. Number 11, Cam Neely to Boston. On June 6, 1986, the Vancouver Canucks traded then 20-year-old Cam Neely and their 1987 first-round draft pick in exchange for Barry Peterson. At the time, Neely was coming off his 3rd season in Vancouver, where he never scored more than 39 points in 1 year, and was often cited for his defensive play. Barry Peterson, however, was already an established player in the league and had 2 100-point seasons under his belt already. Neely would become an instant star in Boston, immediately scoring 72 points in his first season with the Bruins, on his way to leading the team for 11 years, as well as his Hall of Fame career. In addition, that first-round pick that was included in the deal ended up being the 3rd overall selection, and was used to pick Glenn Wesley, who would go on to have 7 decently successful seasons for the Bees. On the other hand, Barry Peterson would stay in Vancouver for just 4 years, never coming close to the offensive production that he displayed while in Boston. After Neely's rise to success, Peterson and the organization were both frustrated with the constant comparisons and reminders of the trade, so he was shipped off to Pittsburgh for next to nothing. Number 10, Patrick Roy to Colorado. On December 6, 1995, the Montreal Canadiens conducted one of the most shocking trades in history when they traded star goaltender Patrick Roy to the Colorado Avalanche. The deal included Roy and Mike Keane in exchange for Andrei Kovalenko, Martin Rucinski, and Jocelyn Thibault. At the time, Patrick Roy and recently hired head coach Mario Tremblay had a notably strained relationship even before he was hired to coach. While they were teammates in the 80s, the two roomed together while on the road, and Tremblay would often mock Patrick Roy's English-speaking abilities and shoot pucks at his throat during practice. In fact, the summer before Tremblay was hired, the two almost got into a fistfight at a Long Island coffee shop, so it wasn't a surprise that Tremblay and Roy would not get along. And on December 2nd, the fateful game against the Detroit Red Wings occurred. In an 11-1 loss, Coach Tremblay left Roy in net for 9 straight goals with the intent of humiliating him in front of the home crowd. When Roy was finally pulled, he walked right up to the president of the team and told him that was his last game in Montreal. Roy had spent 11 seasons as a Montreal Canadien, winning 2 Stanley Cups, 2 Conn Smythe trophies, and 2 Vezina trophies. Even at the time of the deal, the trade was thought to be extremely lopsided, and as time passed, it became worse and worse. Roy would bring immediate success to Colorado, as he would win the 1996 Stanley Cup in his first season there. From that point on, it was continued pure dominance from Roy. Over the course of his remaining 7 seasons in Colorado and in his career, his lowest save percentage was a .913. In addition, he led the team to another Stanley Cup in 2001, where he also won the Conn Smythe Trophy for his Herculean efforts in the postseason. Roy would retire in 2003 and was later inducted to the Hall of Fame, where he was widely regarded as one of the best, if not the best, goaltender of all time. As for the other parts of the deal, Mike Keane would only spend about 2 seasons in Colorado before moving on, but he did win a ring in the trade, and that's all that really matters. For Montreal, they ended up with a whole lot of nothing for trading the best goalie in history. Andrei Kovalenko would spend just 51 games in Montreal before being traded to Edmonton. Rucinski would spend a handful of years in Montreal, but was only able to make the playoffs twice before being traded to Dallas. Thibault would spend 4 seasons in net for Montreal, but ultimately his best season in Montreal was Roy's worst season in Colorado, and was eventually traded to Chicago. Number 9, Brett Hull to St. Louis. On March 7, 1988, the Calgary Flames traded Brett Hull and Steve Bozek to the St. Louis Blues for Rob Ramage and Rick Wamsley. At the time, Hull was in the middle of his second professional season, but his first full NHL season, and he'd shown great potential, scoring 50 points in 52 games, as well as 50 goals in the AHL the year before. Despite these signs, the Flames still decided to part ways with Hull. Rob Ramage would spend just 2 seasons in Calgary and couldn't find his offensive game while there. However, he did win a Stanley Cup with them in 1989 before moving on to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Rick Wamsley, however, would play about 100 games for the Flames, but he was absolutely horrendous throughout his entire tenure there. On the flip side, Brett Hull, of course, would go on to become one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, playing parts of 11 seasons in St. Louis. During his career with the Blues, he would score over 500 goals and would win the Rocky Richard Trophy for most goals in the NHL 3 years in a row, starting just 2 years after the trade in 1990 with 72 goals, followed by seasons of 86 goals and then 70 goals. Despite never winning a cup with St. Louis, Hull was far and away more valuable to his team than Ramage was to that cup run. Number 8, Tyler Seguin to Dallas. On July 4, 2013, the Boston Bruins traded the promising young forward Tyler Seguin to the Dallas Stars. The deal involved 7 pieces switching sides, as Seguin was accompanied by Rich Peverley and Ryan Button in return for Loui Eriksson, Joe Morrow, Riley Smith before he was good, and Matt Fraser. At the time, the trade came as a surprise. Seguin had nearly scored 30 goals in his second year in the league and had been a spark plug during the 2011 Stanley Cup Championship. In fact, Seguin had just signed a 6-year extension with the team in September of 2012 with an extremely favorable cap hit of $5.75 million. At this point in time, Seguin looked like one of the best up-and-coming stars of the league and a player who could be the face of the Bruins' offense moving forward. However, Boston management didn't view things the same way. The media was constantly swirling with stories of him partying to the extent that the Bruins would lock him in his hotel room on the road, so he was shipped off to Dallas. Loui Eriksson was supposed to be the pride and joy of Boston's return in this trade, but things did not quite work out that way. In Dallas, Eriksson had 3 70-plus point seasons and looked like a premier player in the league. However, his first season in Boston was marred by concussion problems as he scored just 37 points, followed by 47 points the next year, and then finally reached expectations in his third year as a Bruin as he recorded 30 goals and 37 assists. Despite his upswing, that would be it for his time as a Bruin, as he signed with Vancouver in free agency after the season. As for the additional 3 players that Boston received, Joe Morrow would play just 58 games before signing in Montreal, while Matt Fraser would play just 38 games for the Bruins and score 5 goals before being claimed off waivers by Edmonton. Riley Smith would have 2 good seasons in Boston, scoring 51 points and then 40 points before being traded to Florida for Jimmy Hayes. As for Tyler Seguin, well, we all know what he's done since his move to Dallas. He's gone to have 3 30-plus goal seasons and 1 40-goal season, and ultimately has scored far more points than the 4 players Boston got in return, combined. Number 7. Alexei Yashin to Long Island. On June 23, 2001, the New York Islanders acquired Alexei Yashin from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Zdeno Chara, Bill McCult, and the 2001 second overall draft pick. Yashin's entire career in Ottawa was rocky, to say the least. The organization touted future bust Alexander Daig as the cornerstone of the franchise and paid him like it, while Yashin was kicked to the curb in the limelight despite incredibly outscoring him. In his first 5 years with the team, Yashin demanded to renegotiate a higher contract 3 separate times, causing the Ottawa public to increasingly sour on him. His biggest low in Ottawa came after the 1998-99 season. Yashin had just scored 94 points in 82 games and decided he was being underpaid with his $3.6 million contract when compared to the likes of Joe Sakic and Steve Yzerman, who were in the $6 to $7 million range. Ottawa refused to renegotiate yet again and stripped him of his captaincy. In return, Yashin refused to report to Ottawa for training camp and the team suspended him. He wouldn't play that entire year and instead tried to argue for free agency through an arbitrator, but the ruling decided that Yashin still had 1 year left on his contract owed to the Senators. So he was back in Ottawa for the 2000-2001 season, where he put up 88 points in 82 games, continuing his dominant play. Then at the 2001 draft, for some unknown reason, Mike Milbury was able to turn a blind eye to everything occurring off the ice with Yashin and made this blockbuster deal. At the time, Chara had played just 4 seasons in the league and was essentially a shell of his future self, but his 6'9" frame of course still carried potential. As for the second overall pick that Ottawa also got in the trade, they basically birthed their future success, as they selected a skilled Canadian named Jason Spezza with that pick. Spezza of course would dominate for the Senators for 12 years, accomplishing far more than Yashin ever could. As for him in Long Island, things only got worse. He was immediately signed to a 10-year, $87.5 million contract, but his point totals declined as soon as he got there, and he was never able to find his scoring touch like he did in Ottawa. He was only able to hit that 30-goal mark once, and after 6 years, he was bought out of the remaining 4 years of his contract and bolted to Russia. Number 6. Roberto Luongo and Olli Jokinen to Florida. On June 24, 2000, continued proven genius Mike Milbury decided to trade his starting goaltender at the time, Roberto Luongo, because they had just selected Boston University goalie Rick DiPietro first overall. So as a part of a bigger package, the Islanders traded Luongo and Olli Jokinen to the Florida Panthers in exchange for Oleg Vasha and Mark Parrish. At the time, Luongo had just completed his rookie season, playing in 24 games with a .904 save percentage. For a rookie goaltender, that's a decent start in the NHL, and definitely enough potential to not draft another goalie first overall. But regardless, Mike Milbury is Mike Milbury, so he decided to throw in the then 21-year-old Olli Jokinen as well. Although he had played just 82 games for the Islanders, he scored just 21 points in that one season before being shipped off to Florida, where he would spend 8 seasons, including 4 years as captain. In South Florida, Jokinen was able to elevate his game to new success. He had 4 30-plus goal seasons, a 91-point season, and an All-Star selection. Luongo would go on to play 317 games with the Panthers, averaging a .920 save percentage and a 2.66 goals against average. Despite competing on a struggling team for most of his time there, Luongo became beloved by the 12 fans and will always be a club legend. Oleg Vasha would go on to score 156 points over 5 seasons, with 51 being his season high before being traded to Phoenix in 2006. Mark Parrish would be a little more successful with the Islanders, as he would score 186 points in 275 games, but he was never able to lead the team to any playoff success. Number 5. Marcus Naslund to Vancouver. On March 20th, 1996, the Pittsburgh Penguins traded their young forward and 16th overall pick from the 1991 draft, Marcus Naslund, to the Vancouver Canucks. Trade talks involving Naslund began because he was in the last year of his deal and had just started to produce at the NHL level. In his first 2 seasons in the league, Naslund struggled a little bit, scoring just 15 points across 85 games. But in his third year, Naslund had a breakout year offensively and scored 52 points in 66 games before being shipped off to Vancouver in a 1-for-1 deal for Alek Stojanov. Naslund would go on to play 884 games in over 12 years for the Canucks. And in addition to one time driving me to hockey practice, he currently sits third all-time for the franchise in points, with 756, and second all-time in goals, with 346. Stojanov, however, would play just 45 games for Pittsburgh, managing just 2 goals and 4 assists before becoming a career minor leaguer and eventually retiring from hockey altogether at age 29. Number 4. Taylor Hall to New Jersey. After years of mediocrity, newly hired GM Peter Chiarelli decided change was needed, so on June 29, 2016, he traded his best goal scorer, Taylor Hall, to the New Jersey Devils in a 1-for-1 trade for Adam Larsson. After going first overall in 2010, Hall scored 20-plus goals in 4 of his first 5 full seasons in the NHL. Despite spending season after season with disappointing results and no help on offense, management became tired of Hall and identified him as a piece that had to go. On one of the craziest days in hockey history, Hall was shockingly flipped to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for former 4th overall defenseman Adam Larsson. The initial lopsidedness of the trade was substantial, as Larsson had been a middling defenseman in the league for 5 years now and was largely considered a bust due to his lack of actual impact at the NHL level. Right off the bat, the hockey world was in a state of shock that this deal was 1-for-1. As time would tell, Hall would go on to score 93 points in 76 games in his second year as a Devil and was named league MVP after seemingly putting the team on his back and dragging them into the playoffs. Larsson, on the other hand, still hasn't evolved from the player that everyone thought he was in New Jersey, and now that he's 26, it looks like he has tapped out his potential. Of course, the mastermind behind the deal, Peter Chiarelli, has not so surprisingly been fired from his duties as Oilers GM, and this deal in particular is guaranteed to be part of the reason why. Number 3. Dominik Hasek to Buffalo. On August 7, 1992, the Chicago Blackhawks traded goaltender Dominik Hasek to the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for fellow goaltender Stefan Beauregard and a 4th-round draft pick. At the time, Hasek had split time between the NHL and the IHL for 2 seasons after coming over from the Czech Republic. Although he wasn't a stud yet, he showed a lot of promise for just coming over to North America. On the other side, Beauregard had not yet played a game for the Sabres, and had also bounced around between the NHL and IHL since he was drafted in 1988. However, this is where their paths begin to differ. Beauregard was immediately flipped to the Winnipeg Jets for Christian Ruuttu just 3 days later. Ruuttu himself obviously did not go on to stardom and would only be on the Blackhawks for parts of 3 years. On the flip side, well, Dominik Hasek went on to be Dominik Hasek. He would be a Sabre for 9 years, averaging about a .930 save percentage throughout his tenure there. And in those 9 seasons, he won the Vezina Trophy as the league's top goaltender 6 times, as well as the Hart Trophy as the league's MVP twice. Before the start of the 2001 season, the Sabres dealt him to the Red Wings in an effort to place him on a more competitive team, where he would eventually win his 2 Stanley Cup championships. Although he was unable to bring a championship to the city of Buffalo, Hasek was still one of, if not the most decorated goalie of all time. He's also considered by some to be the best goalie of all time, however that is a debate for another time. Number 2. Filip Forsberg to Nashville. On April 3, 2013, in an effort to stock up for a lengthy playoff run, the Washington Capitals traded their former 11th overall draft pick, Filip Forsberg, for the veteran Martin Erat and Michael Latta. The Capitals would go on to lose in the first round to the New York Rangers, while Erat would score just 3 points across the 9 regular season games, and going scoreless playing only 4 playoff games. In the following season, Erat would score just 1 goal in the first 53 games of the season, before being traded to the Coyotes for basically a 4th round pick. Latta would hardly make the lineup, and if he did, he would never make an impact. Forsberg, on the other hand, had transformed into a stud. At the time of the trade, he was a point per game in the top Swedish Pro League, and since then he's gone on to score 50-plus points in 6 straight seasons. Number 1. Tom Kurvers to Toronto. On October 16, 1989, the Toronto Maple Leafs traded their first-round pick in 1991 to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for defenseman Tom Kurvers. In their defense, Tom Kurvers was a highly productive offensive defenseman. However, his skill set also made him a huge defensive liability. In the 1988-89 season, Kurvers scored 66 points in 74 games for the Devils. As a 27-year-old, Kurvers was in his prime, so the Leafs decided to acquire him in the first week of the following season to gear for a run to the playoffs. His first year in Toronto, he continued to look promising. He was producing offensively and ended up with 52 points in 70 games. Thankfully, the Leafs did make the playoffs that year as a number 3 seed, but lost in just 5 games to the St. Louis Blues. In the next season, he struggled mightily to start the season. Over the first 19 games, Kurvers managed just 3 assists. So in an attempt to shake things up, they swapped him for Brian Bradley from the Vancouver Canucks. But the Leafs also continued to struggle and finished the season last in the Campbell Conference and without their first-round selection for the upcoming draft. When June finally came around, Eric Lindros of course went first overall to Quebec, and then with the Leafs selection at third overall, the Devils selected a defenseman from the Kamloops Blazers, Scott Niedermayer. Of course, he would go on to win 4 Stanley Cups, 1 Conn Smythe, but just 1 Norris Trophy thanks to Nick Lidstrom, and 2 Olympic gold medals over the course of his 1,263-game NHL career before being inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. So let me know what you guys thought of my top 15, and let me know what trades you think should be on this list instead. Toss me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.